Terrifying. My name is Alton Wang. I am the Equal Justice Works Fellow here at Common Cause, and I'm excited to facilitate our next panel, which is about increasing state and local independent redistricting commissions. May I ask our panelists to join me on stage? We have Alejandra Ponce de Leon, Katie Wright, and Lloyd Fang. Alrighty, hopefully the mics are all working for everybody. I'm just going to do a quick intro of our great panelists who bring really different perspectives and different parts of the journey about establishing and bringing in IRC to their state or their communities. And then we have a couple questions, and I'll be sure that we, like our earlier panel, have a conversation between our panelists here on the stage and everybody here in the audience. I'll start with person furthest to my left, Lloyd Fang, who is the Special Projects Policy Coordinator at the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families. Lloyd has served in this role since August 2021. In this current role, he leads the Invisible No More campaign that advocates for disaggregated data by ethnicity on Asian communities in New York City, New York State, and federal government agencies. In addition, Lloyd represents CACF on the APA Voice Redistricting Task Force, the largest and most diverse coalition of Asian-serving community-based organizations that advocates for fair and effective representation of Asian communities in the region. Next, we have Katie Wright, who's Executive Director of Better Boundaries. Katie is a professional in the nonprofit sector with a focus on connecting human and financial capital to challenges such as climate change and democracy reform. As Executive Director of Better Boundaries, she is charged with advocating for all Utahns in securing an independent redistricting process that centers the need of voters and not politicians. And finally, to my immediate left, we have Alejandra Ponce de Leon, who is the Senior Manager of Political Voice at Catalyst, California. She leads collaborative efforts, technical support, and policy research and analysis to strengthen our democracy by advancing policy changes that eliminate racial disparities and institutional barriers to authentic public participation in decision-making and increase the representation of low-income communities and of low-income communities and communities of color. Our first question, which I'll just maybe go down the row here to get us started today, is can you share a little bit about what gives you hope that fair representation is possible in 2030, particularly as it connects to the IRC efforts that you already have, you're working on, or hoping to have in 2030? And Alejandra?
Good afternoon, everybody. Oh. Hello. All right. I'll project. Okay. Hello. All right. There we go. I won't project too much. Good afternoon, everybody. Alejandra Ponce de Leon. So what gives me hope is, one, I think the experience that we had with the past redistricting cycle for Catalyst California and the coalition that we were convening, the IV Redistricting Alliance. We brought a lot of groups together that are movement building organizations across the state that do a lot of work in communities representing different groups, demographic groups, geographic areas. And we were in this, as newbies. It was our first time going through redistricting process for the majority. Some had had some experience in redistricting in the past, some more extensive than others, but for the most part, this was our first time really engaging in the redistricting cycle. And we were basically building the plane while we were flying it. We were learning about it, learning about the process, so then that we could actually then inform and educate our partner space, in terms of why redistricting matters. And so I believe like the infrastructure that was built, not just within us, but I think across the state and across many other players in other spaces, there was a massive network of infrastructure that was built that I think puts us in a better position for the upcoming cycle, where we've gotten a little bit more experience. And primarily that now we have community-based organizations, grassroots organizations that work directly with the communities most impacted. actually having more experience and more knowledge and being better prepared to know like what to expect and to know like what are the areas that we need to continue building our capacity on. And so having this collective knowledge, having this network, this infrastructure, I think is going to set us up in a very strong place for 2030, where these community groups will actually be showing in a much stronger way, in the hopes of being able to do it in stronger coordination, collaboration. And so that is one of the things that is giving me hope about 2030. So I'll pass it to my colleagues to answer.
Hi.
Is yours working?
Oh, there we go. I have a lot of hope for 2030, and it mostly comes from everyday Utahns drawing a very direct through line to the challenges and obstacles they're experiencing in their lives, and then redistricting or gerrymandering more precisely. It surprises me every day to open up our paper or read social media comments where someone will be commenting on a policy issue that isn't being addressed and essentially lead with and finish with, this is a result of gerrymandering. And so the fact that this wonky, highly technical, very complex problem is now the everyday parlance of people who want their issues to be addressed by their representatives, to me gives me great hope. And I think there's two reasons why Utahns and probably people in other states are feeling that way. One is we had this incredible independent redistricting commission that showed how principled, transparent redistricting is totally possible. And second, we have efforts like this across the country. And so we're hearing about other states who are, alongside us in this fight. And so it's just elevated this issue to kitchen table conversation. And that just gives me incredible hope.
Hi. Oh, there we go. So if I want to talk about hope in the redistricting process in New York State and New York City, I have to start with the train wreck that is still ongoing. I think it's 2023 now, the end of 2023. We today just got notification, right, that the court has ordered the congressional lines to be redrawn. So, the action is going to start again. And so I think at the New York State level, right, I just want to set the tone here, or the stage. We do have a New York Independent Redistricting Commission. There are 5 Democrat appointed individuals and 5 Republican ones. One out of each of the 5 is independent, right, or unaffiliated. But they're politically appointed. Some of them are former legislators. Others are current legislators at a different level of government. So there's a lot of politics involved, right? And so the IRC deadlocked a few years ago, and then the Senate Democrat majority said, we're going to draw the maps. And, created the worst possible gerrymander. All the shapes you saw earlier, we saw like versions of that in New York City and New York State. And then another court ordered those maps to be redrawn because they're unconstitutional. And so then a special master was appointed that then did more public hearings to understand community input, right? And then we actually got really great maps from that. A single person listening to community folks drew the best maps our communities have seen. And so that was New York State. New York City, 15-member commission, 7 appointees from the mayor. The remainder are, from the Democrat speaker and the Republican minority member. And, again, very much politics infused process, right? And so we, for the most part, were able to get maps that were reflective of the massive changes in New York State and New York City's Asian population, right? I think there were over 600,000 new New Yorkers in these communities, and over 300,000 of them were Asian American, right? And the maps that we finally got in the end, for the most part, reflected these changes, right? At the Senate level, we elected the first ever Asian woman to the New York State Senate in South Brooklyn.
Same thing at the assembly level, another representative reflecting those population changes. So there's some hope there, right? But another community, Richmond Hill South Ozone Park, we were promised through the redistricting commission process, right? This map that would combine this community of interest that had been split up into 4 districts, over the last 30 years into a single district, mostly for the first time ever. And that was changed at the 11th hour, and there was no more public input, right? So that is now the standing map. And so what I'm trying to get at, right, is that it's been such a train wreck that there's got to be a better way. And the way forward is a truly independent redistricting commission. I want to really shout out Common Cause New York with Susan Lerner. She was somewhere around here, and other good government groups working to develop a real proposal, a ballot proposal, to really make New York State's independent redistricting commission independent. So there's a lot of hope.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about our panelists here today is that, each of their communities or the states are in different stages of this conversation, right? Some folks have obviously experience with commissions to some extent, certainly not fully independent. And, in LA, they're working on trying to get an IRC. So I think the question that I want to ask next is really, why is a full IRC model something that your communities are currently working towards, wanting to see established, or in the context of having a IRC, what needs to be protected or defended in order to make it actually independent? So maybe I'll start with Katie this time.
So the quick background on Utah is that we, through a ballot initiative, passed an independent commission in 2018. Our ballot initiatives are laws, not amendments, and our legislature repealed the law, replaced it with a watered down version. In 2021, we had our independent redistricting commission follow the standards that that the law had, which was a lot of the original standards and criteria language, and do a really exceptional job. In parallel, we had a legislative redistricting committee do a horse and pony show across the state. And then politics as usual, they went behind closed door and protected incumbents. And those are the current maps. We are litigating those maps right now in court and waiting for a decision. Now I lost track of the question because I was giving you my summary. What was? Why? Oh, why do we want it? Okay, of course. I mean, Utahns want this so bad. I get, $25 checks and I keep fighting all the time. And they really help. And I think in Utah in particular, but probably everywhere else, there's a deep sense of injustice with runaway unchecked power. And we talk about that a lot in our fundraising emails and my Rotary circuit and all of that, is that unchecked power makes people of all political persuasions pretty uncomfortable. And you start seeing corruption and, frankly, just a complete insulation from accountability. And so when we talk to Utahns, yes, communities of interest are really important. And yes, not dividing communities is really important. But the message around unchecked power and a lack of accountability in our government is very powerful. And people really respond to that. They want to be able to hold elected officials accountable. That's essentially what they want. I want that too. And that's what is really, I think, at the heart of our fight right now.
Give it 6 seconds. 5 seconds. Yeah.
Thanks. So I wanted to echo everything you just said, right? The power issue is so bad. But I just wanted to zoom back into the Richmond Hill South Ozone Park example. What is this community, right? This is a community that I think for the last 30 years has really seen an immense growth in population of Indo-Caribbean folks and South Asians. And for the longest time, they've just been cut up at the state Senate level, the state assembly level, at the city council level. The maps just constantly carve them up. And so I think this issue is really one of representation, one of making sure that this community can really get an elected candidate of their choice, finally, that actually can prioritize their needs. And so, for the long, I think the maps that we got at the state Senate, the state assembly level elected the first ever Filipino-American to the state assembly, Stephen Raga. And then I named a few other districts earlier, but this issue is really one of representation for our communities. And to go back to the power example, that special master drew maps that forced certain incumbents to, finally go to bat against each other instead of keeping safe districts, right? I think Representative Jerry Nadler prevailed over Carolyn Mahoney, right? Between the Upper East Side and Upper West Side of Manhattan that were finally combined into a single district instead of being separated. And the original, I think, state, Democratic state Senate majority drawn map, I think, drew his district like from the Upper West Side all the way down to like the weirdest parts of Brooklyn. And it was just these communities, very little, they never really interact with one another. And the subway lines, I don't even know if they like actually connect. So this was a real, I think, area of hope, and it's like a responsibility that we get this right this time, right? Another thing I wanted to mention is that because this process has drawn on so long, 2030 is not that far away now. People are engaged. People know what redistricting is, right? And so there's a lot of things that we can fight for now. Alejandro.
Testing. All right, there we go. So for us at Catalyst California, and here in relation to the city of LA, of having an independent redistricting commission really got a lot of momentum as a result of the audio leaks, recordings among council members, one who were very racist, and really unmasked where these individuals who are supposed to represent our communities, city of LA being so diverse, so huge, and yet here we have a representation of internalized racism being exposed, but being exposed in a conversation about redistricting. And so in the city of LA, we have an appointed commission. They are appointed by the elected officials. They run the whole process. They engage the public. But it's still being, at the end of the day, the decision is held by the city council. And for them to, be recorded having backroom deals, I think demonstrated what I think all of us already knew happened, behind closed doors. But this was a very disastrous moment for the community here in the city of LA to think about. These are the lines that we have, and they were done in a way that, elected officials were looking out for their own political power. How do you divvy up assets so that they fall in your districts? How do you take away power from the Black community? Just being able to hear all of that really demonstrated the reality of what really happens when you have the decision-making in the hands of elected officials who have a vested interest in staying in power. And so for our organization, and many of the partners that we now have as part of our coalition called Our LA, Organize, Unite, Reform LA, really brought us together as an opportunity of one, building multiracial solidarity. Like we need to come together and really address this together. That reforms that will be identified are actual reforms that build and strengthen the political power of communities without harming anyone in the process. So those were the shared values that brought us together. And given, shining the light to the redistricting process, it put the city council in a position where we need to act, and we're going to make solutions, and we're going to have an independent redistricting commission. And this created that opening, right, that was needed. And sadly, it had to be as a result of something like this. But it's an opportunity. And it's an opportunity where our LA, our partners are really thinking about how do we design an IRC that is truly inclusive and that it centers equity and inclusion in its process and its design. And so for us, this means we have an opportunity of building up or building from a lot of the legacy that has been built over the years in California of establishing independent redistricting commissions, and now thinking, how do we take it a step further, of how do we strengthen this model and how do we do it in a way that empowers Angelenos? And so for us, it's really brought community together and really seeing this actually has to be decided by residents without the interference of the interference of politicians, and really about centering community voice and putting community, especially low-income BIPOC communities, at the center and being at the table to, one, apply to be on the commission, but also to meaningfully be engaged in the whole redistricting process. So that's what's really, why we want to see an IRC, and why we want to see an IRC that is shaped by the communities that continue to be marginalized in our democracy.
Thank you for that. And I think that's actually a great transition from, the why to the how and what are we doing. The next question I'd love to pose to y'all is, what efforts are currently underway to either build an actual IRC, shore up a commission, or to establish a brand new IRC in your communities or your states? What strategies are you guys using? What are you guys thinking about? What are the conversations that y'all are having? What are you pushing? Really a broad question here, just kind of get a sense, since I know each of you are coming from slightly different perspectives. I'll start with Lloyd. 5 seconds.
So,
there we go.
Hello. Okay. Still rookie at this. So as I mentioned earlier, Common Cause New York and some other good government groups like the New York Civic Engagement Table, they've convened this coalition of good government groups and community-based advocates interested in reforming how redistricting works in New York State, to really first understand what's out there, right? So I think this group has been doing a lot of research and understanding what independent redistricting commissions exist already. I think the California model, the Michigan model have been most of interest to folks in the coalition at the moment. And so, I think it's in an earlier stage of that ballot initiative process. But speaking more from the APA voice lens, we are fired up, right? We've been fired up, as I mentioned, right? Now we have to, get our communities together to do more testimony towards this congressional map redrawing that just happened today. So I would say that redistricting seems like it's forever. It goes on, right? But what's been interesting is that we've not just been educating folks in the coalition and APA Voice, right, to testify, right? I've done trainings for high schoolers, and they're really upset about what happened, right? They have questions. Why does this line look like this? Why isn't the school I went to 4 years ago in my district anymore, right? Who's this new guy representing me? And so I think part of it is educating young people. And we've actually gone ahead of that, right? And we've engaged with different faith groups in our communities, and they have a certain reach too. And so there's a lot of efforts going on, but of course there can always be more funding, but that's a different issue.
Hello. Okay. So here in LA, there are multiple spaces where folks are getting organized to advocate around an independent redistricting commission. The city council established the ad hoc committee on governance reform. So it's a temporary committee of council members, a group of them, to really do the lead thinking about, what does an IRC include? How do we set it up? What goes in the charter? What goes in the admin code? And what's been really good is that they have set up a process to do public engagement and really open up their deliberations to community stakeholders to attend their meetings, submit public comments, and elevate a lot of critical things for them to consider. And they've been, doing their due diligence to be as inclusive as possible. And so in this space, we've had a lot of other partners who have been reaching out and advocating. So California Common Cause has been a key player in that space. We've had other organized spaces like Fair Rep LA, who's been getting involved, the LA Governance Reform Project, which is a group of academics who have been leading charge and research on this front, and then our LA. And so for us as a coalition, we were very intentional since the beginning of how we were going to approach the development of our recommendations. And IRC is one reform. we are actually looking at multitude of reforms because of this scandal. It's not just redistricting, it's representation. You know, we have 15 council members for a population of like close to 4 million, you know, folks that live in the city of LA with 15 council members. There's issues around voting. There's a lot of things that really need to be transformed in our city. And so RLA, you know, we saw it as an opportunity of coming together to really identify structural reform policies, and that we were going to be doing it in a way that was going to center residents. And through our partners, we have been mobilizing community to inform our process. And so we set out a survey. We had over 2,000 residents participate in the survey, where we asked them specifically around the IRC. We had other questions, but in regards to the IRC, you know, what do you think are going to be critical, you know, issues to elevate, to consider? What are the barriers that need to be removed? You know, what's going to make the IRC process inclusive and engaging of your community? And we also held several community convenings in the spring and in the summer of this year, where we brought together over 600 residents. And we had round group discussions, table discussions, where we asked you, you know, what would it take for you to apply to be on the commission? You know, what are the barriers that you would face, and what would enable you to actually see yourself or your neighbor or your community applying? What will it take for you to actually engage throughout the whole redistricting process? And what we did was listen. We took notes. We asked them, you know, like teased out as much information and knowledge of what they have as a resident who's low income, who's immigrant, who doesn't speak English, who, you know, has been impacted by our criminal justice system, you know, communities from South LA, the San Fernando Valley. Like, we tried really hard to do an engagement process that really talked to people that tend to be ignored and are not heard in the chambers of city council. And we took all of that information, the surveys, the convening feedback, and that actually helped to design the recommendations that we've set forth. We've been engaging with the ad hoc committee for several months, submitting our recommendations, turning out. And we've had some success in seeing now that we've reached a major milestone, actually, like about 2 weeks ago, where the city council actually voted in favor of establishing an independent redistricting commission. That in itself is a victory for us, for the communities, and that, you know, that they're actually considering not setting as a requirement to be a citizen or to have a voting record. That was a recommendation that came from our communities, because they felt that we belong in that process and we belong as a commissioner. And so we feel really strong about where we came from, because it was really shaped by residents and it really informed our advocacy. And, you know, it's not a done deal. There's still a process of getting the language on the ballot. It's going to be on the ballot next year. And so, you know, being ready to engage the community to vote in favor of it is going to be the next step. But we want to continue to see, how do we strengthen the current language that's being considered, so that we do have a strong independent redistricting commission model that is inclusive and that has higher equity standards in terms of community engagement and so forth.
So, you know, our organization is tasked in delivering fair maps to Utah. And we are we understand that this is like an extremely uphill battle, and it has been since 2018. So we look at all the potential strategies, even the ones that are like high risk, low probability. And we bucket them in 3 ways: legislative, electoral, or political, and legal. And I'll start with political first. So when it was clear that really horrible maps were going to come into law, we opened up a PAC, put some money in it, and Utahns also gave a lot. And so we have challenged both Republicans and Democrats who were bad actors, and supported both Republicans and Democrats that were good actors and are likely to support independence in the next cycle. And we don't have a lot of money. There's not really any competitive races, you know, so it's like hard to find good people to support in the PAC. So we operate with this idea that I just want to be like this niggly little thought in legislators' ears during the next go around where they are like, remember what happened to so-and-so? That's what we're hoping for, a sticky narrative that we can ride into 2030. Will it be effective? I'm not sure. We saw legislators in this last process whose district overwhelmingly voted in support of our ballot initiative draw lines behind closed doors to favor themselves, and then kind of think they did a good job because they grandstanded over the congressional maps. So like piercing through to the narrative is really important. So that's our political, it's a very long range. We don't know if it'll work, but we're trying. Electorally, we are working, legislatively, we do fund lobbyists to do a few things. One, keep an eye out for crazy election bills. We have really good universal vote by mail and some great things in Utah, and we want to defend them. And also to make sure that the ballot initiative doesn't become ever more impossible. So Utah has a really, really hard path to the ballot. And for instance, last year, there was a bill trying to make our voting threshold at 60%, a la Ohio. We were able to beat it, and we're sure it's going to come back. So we're looking kind of long range and big picture about all of the ways that we can protect our elections and our ballot initiative path. And then, of course, first and foremost is the lawsuit. Our lawsuit has 5 claims, 4 around the congressional gerrymandering that include like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. But the 5th claim that I think is very interesting is that the actual repeal of Proposition 4 itself was illegal. And that's based on language in our Constitution that says all power is inherent in the people, and the people have a right to alter or reform their government. And I share that because I know a lot of states have that language in their Constitution. And my understanding from the legal experts, which I am not, is that it really hasn't been probed much anywhere in the United States. So we are cautiously optimistic that we could prevail and that that could provide legal footing for other battles in other states that share that language in their Constitution.
Thank you. I think I want to make sure we have some opportunities for questions from the audience or feedback from the audience, but I want to ask just one more question before we go to the audience is, you know, each of you have already touched on this a little bit, but engaging the communities on the ground is so essential in this work, and working with your partners and other organizations and people in the communities you serve. So how are you, and I know Alejandra, you mentioned this a little bit already, but how are you guys working to intentionally foster participation, engagement, take feedback from the communities on the ground, for those of you who haven't talked about that yet? So maybe start with Katie.
During the adoption process, we resourced heavily digital ads, which is expensive, but it was really, really successful. I mean, we, because we had people who had signed a ballot initiative, we had a great start, and then we could use lookalike audiences. You know, again, all things that I don't really know too much about, but we had some great experts that helped us with us. And those folks would come back and say like, oh my gosh, we ran an ad asking people to draw a map, and people did it. So we were really impressed with the success of that. And in addition to, you know, tactics that I think everyone would be familiar with, which is working in deep coalition with so many different partner organizations across the state. In terms of right now, how we keep people engaged is very challenging. The last time anything happened with our litigation was July 31st. There's like, how do we think of things to say every week to our grassroots people who email me and say, when is there going to be a decision? And keep like hope alive and engagement alive, and not just like lose people along the way. And that has been our challenge, honestly, since 2018, because there's been like real gaps in action. And so one, I would say from the beginning, building diversified revenue sources is really important, because not everyone will be there with you every step of the way. So if you have some diversity worked into your budget, it gives you that consistent cash flow to be able to operate. The second is we looked for other ways to be relevant, like some of the legislative work that I just mentioned is really important to our grand plans and to our partners. And so when and how we can step into gaps in services, that has allowed us to continue to have relevant messaging and important calls to action for our grassroots. Yeah.
APA Voice, a redistricting task force, consists of about 20 member organizations, and we're all based in New York City. There are South Asian groups, East Asian groups, Southeast Asian groups all represented, right? And it's across the 5 boroughs. And so I think during this multi-year redistricting process, each community group did certain education-focused events in their own community, right? In the Bronx, in Lower Manhattan, Chinatown, right? In Brooklyn, Chinatown, in Richmond Hill, South Ozone Park, in Woodside, Flushing, you name it. And these were done in English, but also in language, in Korean, in Urdu, in Hindi, right? In Gujarati. And it's really hard to keep that going because of capacity issue, right? Like these orgs, they don't do redistricting full time. They do things like domestic violence services, right? They do things like youth after school programs, senior care, and we're trying to get them to do this on top of that, right? And so I think APA Voice is able to offer some level of a stipend for that kind of work, but it's nowhere near enough. And so, to the funding issue, it's a real issue. I would say that other forms of community engagement that we're engaged in at the moment include, we did this is a little bit different, but we did a documentary documenting this multi-year effort actually. And so there's a lot of footage we have from all the rallies we did in the neighborhoods that were having their lines redrawn at City Hall, and footage from the testimonies that a number of folks did. And so I think that is a really powerful tool, like documenting all the work that goes into the advocacy. And that's something that APA Voice is taking to funders to really make the case that you need to fund this starting now before 2030 comes, because, well, this process is so long and it's important to start early. So I think that is one level. And I think we've been able to screen that in our different communities so far. But I think there's a different strategy that's coming to think more about how to make the most of that.
And then for me, just to add in terms of this question about community engagement, I think something that, was a big lesson learned, and it's not something new from our experience. I think others have shared this, but I think in terms of like, what does it take to meaningfully engage community? It is rethinking how we run public hearings or provide opportunities for communities to participate. I think the convenings that we organized are a model, that not just for redistricting, but just across the board, government officials and jurisdictions should consider, what's going to create opportunities where folks feel like they belong and that they're welcome to participate and that their voice matters. Are you providing a space where you actually are taking input and actually listening and analyzing what folks are saying? Or is it just folks providing public comment while council members are kind of talking on the side? So thinking about how you innovate and really learn from CBOs, like how things are put in practice so that that could actually be institutionalized in something like an independent redistricting commission, where if you have a public hearing, there's going to be translation. Whatever language you speak, you will have interpretation and you will have materials written in your language so that you understand what's going on. That there'll be childcare at these hearings. So you don't have to struggle, how am I going to attend if I have my kids? And it's going to cost a lot to get childcare. Or it's going to be at, during dinner time, I want to go, that's the best time for me to go, but it's dinner time. There'll be food. Those small things create a sense of community and enables community to participate and engage and feel like their experiential knowledge really matters when it really does. And I think the other lesson is how powerful it is when a commission partners with trusted messengers in the community A commission as intentioned, as diverse as it is, may not be the best messenger, may not be in a position to really translate what redistricting means in a way that speaks to someone's everyday life and in their language and in their context. And so partnering with those trusted messengers, with community groups, allows this commission process to actually flourish because you will maximize participation. And so being able to partner and resource those community groups that will open the doors and get folks to understand and connect why it matters to participate and what can I put into that process to really create fair and representative district lines. So those are the two things that I just wanted to highlight when we think about community engagement and what we can take from that to apply it within this context.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I wanted to see if there are any questions from folks in the audience or any thoughts that came up. Yes.
Already. I had a question for Lloyd. I think I heard a mention that you guys are working to try to break out the API population on a census data. Did I hear that in one of the comments?
This is my sworn enemy today. So in my non-redistricting hat, I do lead a campaign called Invisible No More campaign, focused on disaggregated data by ethnicity for Asian communities. We've now expanded that campaign to include partners in the Hispanic community, Black community, different white immigrant communities and so forth, right? And so that's separate of my redistricting work, but I think the reason why I pushed my org to be so active in redistricting and being part of APA Voice is because if you're advocating for better data, right, it will be used. And you want to make sure that data is being used in ways that really align with what the needs are of the historically marginalized populations that we serve. So some of the work that we're doing on that front is we put out recommendations for the revised federal race and ethnicity standards that will be coming out, I think, at the latest summer 2024. We put out 30-something pages worth of recommendations that we did in coalition with our 90+ member organizations across all those, Southeast Asian, East Asian, and South Asian. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, it does, and it's a noble cause. I'm from the city of Long Beach, and so we're documented as having the largest Cambodian population outside of Cambodia, but we can't define the numbers. And it became a big issue for us with our redistricting campaign. So it's a noble effort. I'd love to find out a little bit more about that.
Yeah, happy to talk about later.
All right,
Anyone?
This will be our last question.
Yes, Patricia.
I found this a fascinating panel because if I look at how it's named, it's Increased State and Local Independent Redistricting Commissions. I must confess that had I named this panel, I would have named it What to Do About the Failures of Redistricting Commissions that either were not independent or lack the ability to act. So the question that I have is, given that you are not in a de novo situation, what, if anything, has changed? Because you now have to explain that once upon a time, somebody argued in favor of redistricting commissions and they didn't work.
Sorry, so the question is...
Does it matter that you guys are having to go back and read?
I mean, I think this is for me, right? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think that's a great question. I think New Yorkers have seen that politics-infused redistricting commissions don't work. And like, for instance, I told my breakout group earlier that we did get a lot of Asian American representation on New York City's districting commission. There are 15 folks, like I said before, 3 of whom were Asian. Now, one of whom we had a strong relationship with. We actually nominated that person to be on this commission. There was no public call for nominations. We just, heard it through the grapevine. But the other 2 individuals, one was an appointee by the speaker who was very powerful. And it was this speaker's district that ended up, having the most problems, right, for our Indo-Caribbean folks. And then there was another person who was a zoning and planning expert who thought everything about redistricting just came down to zoning and and planning, and that was just not the purview of his job, right? So, the public has seen all these problems, right? These hearings were so public. And I think there's a lot of motivation to get this right now. It would have been great to have gotten this right the first time, for sure. But people are noticing it now, and I think we can get it right. And good government groups like ourselves, or not ourselves, but like Common Cause New York that we're working close with, we're starting early. So I think we can, things are not great now. They're so bad. We've seen every iteration of bad possible, I think. And so I think we can definitely improve upon this.
I have a lot of thoughts about that. I mean, first, I just kept saying yet. It hasn't worked yet. And also as someone who put up all my Christmas tree lights, had a complete error, had to take them all down and redo it again. I mean, sometimes you don't get it right the first time. That's part of life. Especially in my life when it involves like tactical things that I'm doing. So, right after the bad maps were adopted, we were in a coalition meeting, and the oldest person there had like kind of a content look on her face. And I was like, what's up with Gigi? And Gigi is like, you guys, you did a wonderful job. We came so much farther this time than we did 10 years ago and 20 years ago, which I think it's a really good reason to always have age diversity in the room, because perspective is, you can't buy it. And she was right. Having that dual process put in stark relief, all the good and all the bad. And it made it much more real for people. And they understand now like the very tangible thing they're fighting for. And I think they're as dedicated as ever. So I think that whenever you're trying to do a structural foundational reform, it's going to take a long time. You're going to have incremental wins and losses. You're going to like shove your foot in that door and like slowly pry it open. And that's what this is. I mean, if someone gets it done really fast, I'm impressed. Like, congrats. But I think for most of us, this is the pace of the work. And the phrase that I like in all the work I've done in nonprofits is that all good causes need two things: champions and stamina. And certainly that's what this one needs.
Hello. Okay. In terms of our context, I mean, it's improving what was there in place, which is an appointed commission. And I think that that process, enables community participation, but I think it does open up a window of seeing like how much better can it be? And especially how much better can it be when you center those communities that are often overlooked. And so I think it just reinvigorates community. I can definitely say when we've had our convenings, when folks walked in there and we started talking about independent redistricting commission, they all acknowledge like, damn, this is like really dense information, like it's complicated, but now I get it more. And I want to see this through. And I see more than ever why an independent redistricting commission is so needed. And so maybe folks, don't get all the understanding of it, but the fact that they leave feeling inspired and feeling motivated and feeling included, I think it's like a major win in that process. It's about building consciousness. It's about waking people up and to know about this and to know that there's now this opportunity where you have a chance of shaping a reform, which we've never had, in this meaningful way. But it does take community having to push for it and having to advocate for it. And sadly, elected officials are not going to let go of that power. And it really takes people power, right, to make it happen and to pry it out of their hands. And that stamina and that organizing and the data and the research, all of that. And I think even with independent redistricting commissions, I think there's always room for improvement. There's always room for making it much more inclusive. are much more robust in their engagement and participation. And so I would say, like, you know, future iterations of this are welcome, because it means that folks are really involved and really being intentional about how it serves everybody in the process.
I think that's an excellent place to close on the thought of people power, being why we are here talking about building on IRCs and expanding for more IRCs. So please join me in thanking our panelists for this great conversation today. And I am going to next hand it off to my colleague, Sarah Andre, to bring up the next panel. Thank you, everyone.